The sun was a hammer, and the Arizona Territory in the year of 1878 was the anvil. Everything living was caught between them. Nakai lay flat on an overhang of red rock, the grit pressing into his chest and belly. He was 27 years old, and his eyes, dark and still, missed nothing. He watched the heat shimmer rise from the floor of Ancestor's Gap. Below him, the canyon was more than rock. It was a map of his people, carved by the spirits and the water. That water, the thin green ribbon of life that fed the cottonwoods, was the only reason the town of Dust Mercy existed 3 miles west. His grandmother, Naylan, had taught him Hozo, harmony. It was not a soft thing, it was about balance, and the land was screaming its imbalance. The drought had choked the high desert for 3 seasons. The animals were thin, the earth cracked open, waiting, and now men had come to hammer it further. He saw their new markings, small wooden stakes, driven into the sacred ground near the spring. The iron horse. They meant to bring it through the gap, to sever the water, to feed a machine that only knew how to consume. Nakai closed his eyes for a moment. He saw his brother, Taji, younger, laughing, falling. He saw the gleam of mercenary buttons, heard the crack of a rifle that was not Apache. That had been a year ago. When the first surveyors came, the railroad men called it a misunderstanding. Nakai called it murder. He had kept Hozo then. He had held his hand from the arrow, his finger from the trigger. Harmony, his grandmother said, meant knowing when to wait and when to act as the cleansing storm. The waiting was becoming a sickness in his stomach. He shifted, his leather moccasins silent on the stone. He carried a repeating rifle, a good one, but his knife felt more honest. He watched the heat boil the horizon, and he waited. Miles away, the stagecoach bucked and wallowed in the same red dust. Evelyn Shaw, 21 years old, pressed a damp cloth to her forehead and tried not to choke. She had left Missouri because there was nothing left for her there. Her mother was gone, buried under a willow tree, and the small farm had been sold to pay debts she did not understand. She had her teaching certificate, a small trunk of books, and a second trunk filled with nursing supplies. She believed in the goodness of hard work and the simple justice of helping a neighbor. She had never been kissed. She had never known a man's touch beyond a handshake or a clumsy pat on the back from her father. God rest him. In that way, she was as new and unopened as the high desert territory itself. She had come to Dust Mercy to be the new schoolmistress, and, as the town council's letter had gratefully added, to assist with nursing, as they had no proper doctor. The coach rattled to a stop, the driver shouting curses at the horses. Evelyn peered through the dust-caked window. Dust Mercy was not a town. It was an argument with the desert, and the desert was winning. It was 2 rows of tired wooden buildings facing each other across a wide, rutted street of powdered red earth. A saloon, a mercantile, a blacksmith's forge, and a small, stark white building with a crooked cross on top. That, she assumed, was the church and, according to the letter, her schoolhouse. The air smelled of hot rock, alkali, and something else. Horses, yes, but also anxiety. The few people she saw moved with a slow, sun-beaten deliberateness. A woman in a faded calico dress disappeared into the mercantile. A man with a heavy pistol on his hip leaned against a veranda post, watching the stagecoach with dead eyes. This was it. This was her new life. Evelyn gathered her courage, straightened her bonnet, and stepped down into the furnace. The man with the pistol straightened up. He was wearing a tin star. Sheriff Malloy. He was thick in the middle, his face a map of broken veins. "Miss Shaw," he said. It was not a question. His eyes traveled over her, from her dusty boots to her sweat-dampened collar. "You are the new teacher." "Yes, Evelyn Shaw. She would not be intimidated." She held out her hand. Sheriff Malloy looked at her hand for a long second before taking it. His grip was damp and brief. "The schoolhouse is down there. Key is with the barkeep at the Gilded Cage. He holds the town council meetings. The saloon, Evelyn asked, her voice betraying her Missouri sensibilities. We are a practical town. Miss Shaw, Malloy said. A small, unpleasant smile touching his lips. And a thirsty one. Welcome to Dust Mercy, try not to dry up. He turned and walked away, his boots kicking up small puffs of red. The town was quiet, but it was not peaceful. It was the quiet of an animal holding its breath. From the saloon, she heard the faint, tinny sound of a piano. From the blacksmith, the rhythmic clang of a hammer. Somewhere, a child coughed, a dry, hacking sound. She heard a hymn, thin and hopeful, coming from the direction of the church. Smoke rose from a small adobe structure, carrying the scent of roasting corn. These small sounds of life fought against the oppressive, burning sky. She collected her trunks and dragged them toward the church. The small building was cleaner than the rest of the town, but the white paint was peeling. Inside, it smelled of dry wood and old paper, benches for services, smaller desks for pupils. Her quarters were a single room attached to the back, barely large in which to turn around, containing a cot, a washstand, and a small, cold stove. She sat on the cot, the straw mattress rustling beneath her. She was an orphan, 1,000 miles from home, in a town that felt like the end of the world. She felt a sharp, sudden pang of loneliness that was so physical it made her gasp. No, she stood up. She was Evelyn Shaw. She believed in honest work. She opened her trunk of nursing supplies. Carbolic acid, bandages, laudanum, quinine. She began to organize. She would make this work. She had to. That night, in the gilded cage, the rumors were thicker than the whiskey. Baron Rusk is a man of vision, the mercantile owner said. Polishing a glass, this railroad contract means prosperity. It means ice in the summer. It means goods from back east. It means giving him the water, Deacon Hale, the blacksmith, said. He was a large man, a former Buffalo soldier, and his voice was a deep bass that cut through the saloon chatter. And that water does not belong to us to give. It comes from the Gap. The Gap is just rock, Hale, Sheriff Malloy said from his corner table. He was drinking, his hat tipped low, and the Apache are not using it for civilized purposes. They live by it, Hale said quietly. Same as us. Things change, Malloy said, his voice final. Progress. Baron Caleb Rusk. The name hung in the air. He was a man in Philadelphia, a man of immense wealth who had never seen Arizona, but his shadow stretched all the way here. His will was being done by men like Malloy, and by the dozen riders camped just outside town limits. They were not soldiers. They were mercenaries, hired guns, led by a man named Lance Crowder. They wore new pistols and drank Rusk's whiskey, and they looked at the townswomen with a cold ownership. The native people, the Apache, were not at the table. They were not in the saloon, not in the mercantile, not in the church. They were ghosts in their own land, spoken of as problems to be managed or dangers to be eradicated. From her small room, Evelyn heard the low murmur of the saloon. She looked out her window. The desert was not dark. It was flooded with a brilliant, cold moonlight that made the red dust look like silver ash. It was beautiful, in a way that terrified her. She thought of the sick child she had heard coughing. She thought of the heavy pistol on the sheriff's hip. She felt a deep, unfamiliar anger, a sense of injustice. The people who lived here, who baked in this sun, who raised their children and buried their dead. They were being treated as pawns in a game played by a rich man far away. On the ridge above Ancestors' Gap, Nakai watched the lights of Dust Mercy. They were a small, defiant flicker in the great, breathing darkness of the desert. He saw the campfires of Crowder's men, separate from the town, like wolves circling. He felt the imbalance, the railroad, the drought, the fear from the town, the anger from his own people. He was a man caught between. His brother's blood stained the ground near the springs. His grandmother's teachings demanded harmony, but the world was tilting. and he feared that to restore the balance, he would have to become the storm. He pulled his blanket tighter. The desert night was cold. He was Apache. He was a warrior and a scout. He would protect the gap. He would honor his brother. He did not know this new teacher from Missouri, this Evelyn Shaw. He did not know her heart, but he knew she had arrived at the moment the anvil was about to break. And he knew, with the certainty of a man who reads the sky, that the hammer was about to fall. 3 days after her arrival, Evelyn Shaw was learning the limits of her supplies. The dry, hacking cough she had heard on her first day belonged to a small boy named Thomas, whose mother, Maria, had the same sun-beaten, anxious eyes as everyone else in Dust Mercy. Evelyn had given her the last of her cough syrup, knowing it was only a temporary balm. The town needed quinine, it needed proper bandages, and it needed more laudanum than her small trunk held. The stagecoach driver, a man named Silas, had told her a supply wagon was due from the larger settlement at Prescott. A 2-day ride, it carried mercantile goods, whiskey for the Gilded Cage, and a precious crate marked for the church, containing medical texts and, she prayed, the supplies she had ordered. She had convinced Silas to let her ride with him just to the halfway point, where a small trading post stood. She could not bear to sit and wait. She had to do something. The ride out had been brittle and hot. The ride back was worse. The sun was a physical weight, pressing down on the wagon. "They are late," Silas said, peering at the sky. He was driving the lighter medical and mail wagon, following the main supply wagon by 100 yards. "Should have met the main wagon an hour ago." Evelyn was about to reply when the world exploded. The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed first, followed by a spray of rock and dust from the canyon wall to their left. It was not a single shot. It was a volley. "Raiders," Silas bellowed, whipping the horses. "Get down, miss." Evelyn threw herself to the floorboards of the wagon box, her bonnet flying off. She heard the heavier wagon ahead of them grind to a halt, the sound of splintering wood and men shouting in panic. Another bullet tore through the canvas cover of her own wagon, missing her head by inches. It buried itself in a sack of mail with a sickening thud. She was shaking, her heart trying to climb out of her throat. She smelled gunpowder and sweat. This was not a robbery. This was an execution. The shots were not aimed at the horses. They were aimed at the men. Nakai had been tracking this group for a day. He knew them. They were Lance Crowder's men. They had been drinking heavily at their camp. And this morning, they had ridden out, not toward the gap, but toward the Prescott Trail. They wore no insignia, their faces covered by bandanas. They were acting. He had moved along the high ridges, staying parallel to them, expecting them to harass the Apache camps near the dry riverbed, but they had bypassed them. Now he understood. He saw them open fire on the first wagon. He saw the driver fall. He saw the second, lighter wagon try to turn. They were pinning it down. This was a massacre, designed to look like the work of his own people, designed to create a panic, designed to make the town of Dust Mercy so terrified that they would sign any piece of paper, give away any amount of water, just to feel safe again. Rusk, this was Rusk's hand, moving his pieces. Nakai rose from the rocks 100 yards above them. He did not aim for a man. He aimed for the rock face just above the lead shooter's head. He fired. The rifle's report was sharp, authoritative. A shower of granite chips rained down on the mercenary. The man cursed, firing wildly up at the ridge. Nakai was already gone. Sliding 20 yards to the right, behind a different outcrop, he fired again. This time, his bullet struck the rifle stock of a second man, splintering the wood and tearing it from his grip. "Damn it, we are exposed," one of the men shouted. "Where is he?" They could not see him. They were in the open. He was part of the stone. He was the high ground. He fired a third time, kicking up dust directly in front of their horses. The animals screamed and reared. Lance Crowder, recognizable even with the bandana, saw the fight was lost. This was supposed to be quick and bloody. It was not supposed to be a battle with a ghost on the ridge. He gave a sharp whistle, a signal for retreat. The men wheeled their horses, firing a last, useless volley toward the rocks, and disappeared back into a side canyon. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of a horse's panicked breathing. Nakai waited a full minute, scanning the rocks. They were gone. He slung his rifle over his back and moved down the scree slope, his steps silent and certain. Evelyn slowly lifted her head. The shooting had stopped. "Silas," she whispered. Her driver was slumped over, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. He was alive, but his breath was a shallow groan. We are hit. Miss, another man, a guard," stammered from the ground. He was clutching his leg. She scrambled out of the wagon, her nursing instincts taking over her fear. She ripped open her own bag, pulling out bandages. As she reached the guard, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, gasping, and her hand went to her mouth. It was an Apache. He was tall, his frame lean and hard, his black hair held back by a simple band. He carried a rifle, and his eyes were not hostile. They were just appraising. He looked at her, at the wounded men, at the bullet-riddled wagon. He knelt by Silas, his movements economical. He examined the shoulder wound, his touch surprisingly gentle as he assessed the damage. He looked at Evelyn. "It is not deep," he said. His voice was low, rough, like stones rubbing together. "But he bleeds much. Press here, hard." He guided her hand to the pressure point. Evelyn, her own hands shaking, did as she was told. The blood flow slowed. The Apache man moved to the guard, pulling out his own knife. Evelyn flinched, but he simply cut the man's pant leg open, examined the wound, and nodded. "This one will live. The bone is fine." He looked back down the trail at the first wagon. It was silent. He walked toward it, his rifle held ready. Evelyn watched him go. He returned a moment later, his face a mask. "The others are dead." He tied the reins of the lead wagon to the back of Evelyn's. He checked the horses, calmed them with a few low words she did not understand. And then he climbed into the driver's seat. He looked down at her. "Get in. I will take you to the town." She helped the wounded guard into the back, then climbed up onto the seat beside the Apache. She said nothing. She was too numb, too frightened, and too strangely grateful to speak. He snapped the reins, and the wagons lurched forward, leaving the dead behind for the desert. The arrival in Dust Mercy was a collision, the sight of the Apache, Nakai, driving the shot-up wagon, with a pale Evelyn Shaw beside him and two wounded men in the back, sent a wave of panic through the street. People poured out of the saloon and the mercantile. "Apache," someone yelled. "They have attacked the wagon. They have got Miss Shaw." Deacon Hale emerged from his forge, a heavy hammer in his hand. Sheriff Malloy stepped onto the boardwalk, his hand on his pistol, a look of cold calculation on his face. Lance Crowder was there, too, standing near the sheriff, his face clean, looking concerned. "What is this?" Nakai Malloy called out, his voice dripping with false authority. "You bring our wagon back after your friends shoot it to pieces." Nakai pulled the wagon to a halt. He said nothing. He simply sat there, watching the crowd. Evelyn, covered in dust and Silas's blood, found her voice. It was shaky, but it was clear. "That is not what happened." She stood up on the wagon seat, so everyone could see her. She was trembling, but her eyes were furious. "We were ambushed by white men, men with rifles, hiding in the rocks. They murdered the men on the first wagon. They would have killed us all." She pointed, her fingers steady, at Nakai. This man saved us. He appeared on the ridge. He drove them off. He is the only reason we are alive." The crowd was silent. They looked from Evelyn to Nakai, and back again. Crowder's face was stone. Malloy's lip curled into a sneer. "A midnight hero," Malloy said, loud enough for all to hear. How convenient. Seems this town owes you a debt. Nakai. Or maybe, he let the pause hang, you just scared off your competition. Evelyn climbed down. She walked past the sheriff, ignoring him completely, and stood by the wagon wheel, looking up at Nakai. He had not moved. He was still watching the crowd, his gaze missing nothing. Sir, she said, her voice formal, I do not know your name, but I thank you for my life. Nakai turned his head. His eyes met hers. He held her gaze for a long time, as if measuring her, weighing her words. He saw no deceit. He saw shock, and he saw a core of steel she did not yet know she possessed. He gave one short, dry nod. Then he stepped down from the wagon on the opposite side, and without a word to anyone else, he began to walk, not toward the street, but between the buildings, toward the open desert. He vanished as silently as he had arrived. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. She sat in her small clinic room, the schoolhouse dark behind her. She had cleaned and stitched Silas's shoulder and the guard's leg. They would both recover, but she could not wash the images from her mind, the sound of the bullets, the sight of the dead men on the other wagon. She was here to teach children, to heal the sick, but there were men here who murdered for sport, or for profit, men who would have killed her without a second thought. She thought of the sick children, of their mothers, of the people in this town living under the shadow of men like Crowder. They were the weak, the unprotected. She had come here to escape a life she did not want, but she had found a fight that mattered. Nakai, too, was watching from his vantage point. He saw the lights of Crowder's camp, bold and arrogant. The ambush had failed in its execution, but it had succeeded in its purpose. Fear was now a poison in the town's water. Malloy's words confirmed the alliance. The law was protecting the wolves. This was not just about the railroad anymore. It was about his brother's death. The men who killed Taji were the same men who shot at the wagon. They were Rusk's men. His duty was clear. He had to protect the gap, the sacred water, and he had to find justice for his brother. The woman, Evelyn, she had spoken the truth. That was rare. It made her dangerous. It made her a target. The next morning, Evelyn found something while cleaning the blood from the wagon box. Her fingers brushed against a small piece of metal, lodged in the wood where the bullet had struck near her head. She pulled it out. It was a brass cartridge casing. It was not like the army casings she had seen. This one was larger, heavier, and on the bottom, stamped into the metal, was a small, unfamiliar symbol, 2 hammers crossed over a letter R. She thought it was evidence. She thought it mattered. She took it straight to Sheriff Malloy. He was in his office, boots on his desk. Sheriff, she said, placing the small piece of brass on his desk, I found this in the wagon. It is from one of the rifles. I thought it might help you find who they were. Malloy picked it up. He squinted at the R. His face betrayed nothing. He rolled the casing between his thumb and forefinger. A piece of brass. Miss Shaw, he said, his voice bored. They are $10 a dozen. But the mark, she insisted, it must mean something. I am sure it does. He smiled, a thin, reptilian smile. Thank you for your civic duty. I will add it to the file. He dropped the casing into his vest pocket. Evelyn watched it disappear. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She knew, with absolute certainty, that no one would ever see that bullet casing again. It was gone. It had been lost the moment she handed it to him. The price for her testimony came quickly. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Malloy found her sweeping the schoolhouse. Miss Shaw, a word. He stayed on the boardwalk, forcing her to come to the door. The town council held an emergency meeting, given the heightened tensions. And your recent excursion, we have decided that the town stipend for your little clinic is no longer in the budget. We just cannot afford it. You will have to make do with what you have. Her stomach tightened. But Sheriff, the children, the quinine. Times are hard. Miss, he said, tipping his hat. He was enjoying this. You stick to your books. It is safer. The price for Nakai was delivered at the same time. Malloy sent a deputy to the edge of town, where Nakai was known to watch. The message was simple. The sheriff says thanks for the help. Apache. But he says the townsfolk are spooked. For your own safety. You are not to be found within town limits after sundown, or you will be arrested or shot. Evelyn stood in the doorway of her small clinic, looking at the shelves. They were already half empty. She had lost her support. She was alone. She thought of the lost bullet. She thought of the sheriff's cold eyes. She thought of the quiet, brave man who had been banished for saving her. She looked at the small cot where Thomas, the sick boy, had coughed. This was not just, it was wrong, from the ground to the sky. She closed her hand into a fist. If no one else will, she whispered to the hot, empty air. I will. The failed ambush demanded a new tactic, force. The next morning, a notice was posted on the sheriff's office door. It was professionally printed, a stark contrast to the town's weary wood. It was not from Sheriff Malloy. It was an open letter to the citizens of Dust Mercy, signed by a local agent of the Rusk Expansion Company. The terms were simple. Baron Rusk was offering progress. He was offering protection from the native threat, a threat his own men had fabricated. In exchange, the town council merely had to sign over exclusive water rights to Ancestors' Gap. The offer was generous. It claimed it would make them all rich when the railroad came through. Then came the final paragraph. This generous offer stood for 10 days. If, after 10 days, the town had not seen the wisdom in this partnership, the Rusk Expansion Company could not, in good conscience, continue to fund the security operations in the area. Sheriff Malloy's deputies, funded by Rusk's dime, would be recalled. Crowder's men would move on. It was an ultimatum, wrapped in the language of commerce. Sign away your water, or we will let the monsters we created devour you. The clock was ticking. Evelyn had lost her stipend, but not her will. She was cleaning the small clinic when the door opened. It was not a patient. It was Dominga. Evelyn knew her only by sight. Dominga was perhaps 35, a woman of mixed Mexican and Yaqui heritage, who ran the Gilded Cage with an efficiency that bordered on silent menace. She was beautiful, but it was a hard beauty, shaped by survival. She wore a dark red dress, practical, not flashy, and her black hair was in a severe bun. She never seemed to miss anything. Miss Shaw, Dominga said, her voice low. She did not waste time on pleasantries. Please, call me Evelyn. Are you hurt? Not on the outside. Dominga said she closed the clinic door, a rarity in the suffocating heat. She looked at Evelyn, her dark eyes searching. You spoke up, at the wagon. You told the truth. It was the truth, Evelyn said, feeling defensive. The truth is a dangerous thing in Dust Mercy. Dominga unrolled a piece of oiled canvas she had carried under her arm. She spread it on Evelyn's small examination table. It was a map, not a printed one, but hand-drawn, detailed. It showed the high desert, the town, and the winding path of Ancestors' Gap. This is Malloy's map, Dominga said. He and Crowder were reviewing it last night. They drink too much. They forget I clear the tables. She tapped a spot on the map. Deep inside the gap, near the springs. This is where they want the water tower. Then she traced a second line, a proposed route for the tracks, sketched in pencil. It cut across a section of the canyon marked with small, cross-hatched circles. What is that? Evelyn asked. The switching yard, Dominga said, but that is not all it is. She looked Evelyn in the eye. My grandmother was Yaqui. She traded with the Apache. I know their ways. That ground. She tapped the circles again. Is their ancestral burial ground. It is where their great-grandparents rest. It is holy ground. Evelyn felt a chill. Despite the heat, They are going to run the railroad right through it. They are going to dynamite it, Dominga corrected. Blast it open, move the bones, lay the track. They do not see it as a graveyard. They see it as a soft spot in the rock. Here was the proof. This was not just about water. It was about desecration. It was an act of profound, calculated cruelty. "Why show me?" Evelyn asked, her voice a whisper. "Because Deacon Hale says you are stubborn. Because you stood up to Malloy. And because—" Dominga's face hardened. "I spit on men who dig up bones for profit. This is not just Apache business. Miss Shaw, this is human business." She rolled up the map. "Be careful. Malloy will miss this soon." She left as silently as she had come. Nakai did not need a map to know where his ancestors lay. He could feel the ground's disturbance from a mile away. He was tracking the perimeter of the gap, staying high. When he saw the smoke, it was not a campfire. It was the wrong color, oily and black. He moved closer, his stomach tightening. He crept to the edge of a bluff and looked down. It was Crowder. Not all his men, just 3 of them. They were laughing? They were at the boundary marker, a totem carved by his grandfather. It was not a religious icon, but a signpost. It marked the edge of the burial ground, a request for respect to all who passed. They had pulled it from the earth. They had doused it in kerosene. And they had set it on fire. Nakai watched the carved eagle, the symbol of his clan, blacken and curl into ash. The laughter of the mercenaries drifted up to him. His hand went to his knife. His rifle felt heavy in his hands. It would be so easy. 3 shots, 3 dead men. Justice for his grandfather's memory. Justice for Taji. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. He sighted on Crowder's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger, taking up the slack. Then he heard another sound. Laughter, but not from the men. It was higher. He shifted his gaze. 50 yards away, playing in the shadow of a large boulder, were 2 small children from his own camp. They had wandered too far, drawn by the horses. They were hidden from Crowder, but they were in the line of fire. If he shot, the mercenaries would return fire, wildly, and the children would be caught. Nakai let his breath out, a long, slow hiss. He lowered the rifle. Hozo, harmony! It was not the cleansing storm. Not today. Today! It was the agony of restraint. He watched the men mount their horses, watched them ride away, still laughing, leaving the totem a smoking ruin. He waited until they were long gone before he slid down the rock face and gathered the terrified children. His face a mask of iron, hiding the rage that burned hotter than the fire. Evelyn knew she had to act. The map, the desecration. She had to warn Nakai. She had to warn the Apache. But he was banished. She walked to the edge of town, where the desert began. She felt exposed, watched by every window. She did not know how to find him. She just stood there, holding a small basket with bandages and a jar of clean water, as if on an errand. She waited for an hour, the sun beating on her. Then he was just there. He had not made a sound. He stepped from behind a cluster of cholla cactus, his rifle in his hand. "You are not safe here," he said. "I had to see you." She was breathless, partly from fear, partly from the heat. "I know what they are planning. It is not just the water. It is the graveyard." She explained what Dominga had shown her. Nakai's face did not change, but his eyes grew colder. "We know. We saw the smoke. They burned the marker." "Then you must stop them," she said, realizing how foolish that sounded. "They have many guns, and the town gives them shelter. The town does not know," Evelyn insisted. "Malloy and Crowder, yes, but the others, Deacon Hale, the mothers, the ranchers, they are just scared. They think the railroad will save them. They do not know they are signing away a graveyard." He looked at her, skeptical. "They are white. They will protect their own." "Then let us tell them," she urged, finding a strength she did not know she had. If they heard it from you, from your people, a public meeting. Let your elders speak to the town. Let us put the truth on the table for everyone to see. Malloy cannot arrest the whole town. Nakai considered this. It was a white man's tactic, words in a room. But his own tactics, watching from the hills, had not saved the totem. Maybe her way had merit. My grandmother, Nalin, is the elder. She does not come to the town of those who broke the treaty. Then I will go to her. Evelyn said, if you will take me, arrange a meeting, a public talk, we must try. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but also the honesty. She was not playing a game. I will ask, he said. Stay away from the desert's edge. You are watched. He turned and was gone. The next day, Evelyn's small hope was crushed. She was walking to the mercantile when she saw the commotion. Sheriff Malloy and 2 of his deputies were in front of the gilded cage. They were dragging Dominga out by her arms. What is this? Evelyn cried, running forward. Town business. Miss Shaw, Malloy growled. Stay out of it. Dominga, what happened? He is arresting me, Dominga shouted. Struggling. He missed his map. Malloy's face flushed purple. He shoved Dominga forward. She is inciting rebellion, spreading lies about the railroad, trying to stir up trouble between us and the natives. That is against the law. You cannot arrest her for that, Evelyn protested. I can arrest her for anything I want, Malloy said. Sedition, vagrancy, spying. Lance Crowder stepped off the saloon porch, a cigar in his teeth. And her license to operate this establishment is hereby under review. One more word, and my men will tear this pile of sticks down for firewood. They dragged Dominga to the small, windowless shack that served as the jail and threw her inside. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. It was a message. It was a trap, and Dominga had been caught in it. But it was a message intended for Evelyn. This is what happens when you help them. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment. The street was silent. Everyone was watching. They were watching her. She turned and marched directly to the sheriff's office. Malloy was sitting inside, cleaning his pistol. What is her bail? Evelyn demanded. Malloy looked up, surprised. Bail? There is no bail. She is a threat to public safety. You have no right. You have no proof. I have a sworn complaint. From Mr. Crowder, Malloy smiled. That is all the proof I need. I will sign for her, Evelyn said. A surety bond. I will vouch for her. Put my name on the line. I am the town's teacher. My word must mean something. Malloy laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Your word, Miss Shaw. After your performance at the wagon, your word is worth about as much as an Apache promise. Sign the paper, Evelyn said, her voice low and shaking with rage. Or I will send a telegraph to the territorial governor. I will tell him you are arresting citizens without cause and denying them bond. I will tell him about the bullet casing you lost. Malloy's smile vanished. He stared at her. He had not expected this. He had expected a weeping girl. He saw a furious woman. He knew the governor was being pressured by Rusk. But a formal complaint about illegal imprisonment was messy. He spat on the floor. Fine. He grabbed a piece of paper. You sign this. You are responsible for her. She takes one step out of line, one word, and I am arresting both of you. And you will lose your schoolhouse. Evelyn took the pen. Her hand did not shake. She signed her name. That night, she sat in her small room, terrified. She had just wagered the only thing she had, her job and her freedom. There was a soft scratching at her back window. She froze. She crept to the window. It was dark. She saw nothing. A small object dropped onto the windowsill and he was gone. She picked it up. It was a small amulet, a piece of smooth, carved ironwood, shaped like the head of an eagle. It was tied to a leather thong. It was simple and felt warm, as if it had been worn for a long time. It was from Nakai. He knew what she had done. She did not know it was his clan's mark. She did not know it was a promise of protection, the most solemn vow a warrior of his people could give to one not of the blood. But as she closed her hand around the wood, she felt, for the first time since arriving in Dust Mercy, that she was not entirely alone. The rumor started the next day. Did you hear the school teacher spent all night with that Apache? He gave her a gift. She is signing for the saloon woman. She is taking their side. I saw her, standing at the edge of the desert, waiting for him. Like well, you know. I am not sending my children to be taught by a native lover. The whispers followed her down the street. When she went to the mercantile, the proprietor suddenly busied himself in the back room, leaving her waiting. The mothers who had been friendly now pulled their children close, offering only curt nods. Evelyn felt the shame like a physical blow. They were twisting her actions, making her stand for justice seem like something dirty. But the next morning, she rang the school bell. Only 3 children came: Thomas, the boy who coughed, and the 2 young daughters of Deacon Hale. Evelyn swallowed her pain. "Good morning, children," she said, her voice bright. "Let us begin." She would not be broken. She taught them their letters. She taught them their arithmetic. And then she took a piece of chalk and drew on the blackboard. She drew a picture of water. "This is water," she said. Then she wrote a new word beside it, a word Nakai had used to calm the horses. In Apache, she said, her voice clear and proud. "It is two. It means the same thing. It is just as important." She would teach. She would hold her ground. The sign on the sheriff's wall was a stark reminder. The offer was for 10 days. 3 had already passed. The clock was ticking. 7 days remained. The rumors had cost her. Evelyn's school now held only 3 pupils, the 2 dark-eyed daughters of Deacon Hale, and young Thomas, whose cough had eased but still rattled in his small chest. The rest of the town looked through her, their gazes sliding past as if she were a ghost. The whispers of her association with Nakai had painted her as something unclean. She had signed for Dominga, and in doing so, had chosen her side. The town, in its fear, was choosing its own. 6 days remained on Baron Rusk's ultimatum. Evelyn was cleaning the chalkboard, the faces of her 3 small students intent on their sums, when a shadow fell through the open door. It was not a townsperson. It was Nakai. He did not enter the schoolhouse. He stood on the threshold, just outside the line of sunlight, respecting the boundary of her world. He was banished, and his presence here, in broad daylight, was a profound risk. The children stopped their work, their eyes wide. He looked at her, his gaze taking in the nearly empty room. He nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged her sacrifice, the price she had paid for bailing Dominga. "My grandmother will speak," he said, his voice low, meant only for her, but not on the word of a stolen map alone. "The white men will call it a lie. They will say we are trying to scare them." "Then what do we do?" Evelyn whispered, moving to the doorway. "We bring them the mountain," he said. "We bring them proof that their own wells will turn to dust. Rusk's dynamite will not just take our water. It will kill the aquifer. It will cut the heart from the spring. I know where to look. I know where the vein shows itself." Geological proof, she breathed, her mind racing. Evidence they cannot deny. "I will go. I will bring back a cutting of the rock." "No," Evelyn said, the word surprising her with its force. "They will not believe you. They will say you found it anywhere. I must come. I must see it. I must write it down in my own hand. I will be your witness." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. He saw the teacher, the nurse. He saw the stubbornness. He also saw a woman who could not climb, who could not move silently, who would be a danger to them both. "It is a hard journey, deep in the gap. If Crowder's men see us, they will shoot." "I am not afraid." She lied. "We must go." He stared at her for a long moment. "Tonight, when the moon is high, be by the stream at the edge of town, Bring nothing but your book and a pencil, and wear dark clothes." He was gone. The journey was a trial of ghosts and stones. Nakai moved like water flowing uphill, silent, effortless. Evelyn felt like a bag of falling rocks. She snagged her dark skirt on thorns. Her boots slipped on the scree, and her breathing sounded to her like a blacksmith's bellows in the vast, cold silence. He never criticized. He simply paused, waited for her to catch up, and then moved on. His hand occasionally pointing to the shadows, warning her where not to step. They moved for hours, deeper into the sacred canyon than any townsperson had ever been, until they reached a place where the high rock walls closed in, forming a small, secret bowl. A trickle of water, smelling of sulfur, bubbled from the rock. It was a hot spring, veiled in a faint mist that cooled in the night air. "This is the place," Nakai said. "The water here is old. It comes from the deepest part of the earth." They waited for the first light. As the sun touched the canyon rim, they began their work. Nakai used his knife to chip at the rock near the spring, while Evelyn searched the walls, looking for the strata, the lines of formation. "It is not clear," she said, frustrated, her hands and the hem of her skirt covered in wet, alkali mud. "The rock is all the same." "Patience," he said. He was examining the flow of the water, the way it pooled. Evelyn, hot, filthy, and discouraged, looked at the small, steaming pool. She was caked in grime. "I must see their patrol routes," Nakai said suddenly, his eyes on the ridge above them. "I must be sure we were not followed. I will be faster alone. Wait here. Do not leave this place, and do not make a sound." He scaled the rock wall like a lizard and was gone. Evelyn was alone. The silence was absolute. She looked down at herself. She was covered in mud. She felt the grit on her face, under her fingernails. She looked at the clear, warm water bubbling in the pool. He would be gone for an hour, at least. She was exhausted. She was hidden. It was a foolish, desperate thought. To be clean, just for a moment. She listened. Nothing. She was as alone as if she were on the moon. She untied her bonnet. She unlaced her heavy, mud-caked boots and peeled off her stockings. She looked at her dress, stained and heavy, with trembling fingers. She unbuttoned it, letting it fall to the dusty bank. She stood only in her thin cotton chemise. She waded into the pool. The water was warm, a shocking comfort. She cupped it in her hands, washing the grime from her face and arms. She was not bathing, merely rinsing. She was still modest, still terrified, but the water felt like a blessing. She looked to the bank, where she had left her clothes in a pile. She had not seen the way the spring gathered, fed by small, hidden rivulets, before it tumbled over a short, sharp drop into the main creek below. A surge of water, released from some unseen shift in the rock above, suddenly pulsed through the pool. It was not a flash flood, not a wall of water, but a swift, powerful current. It licked at the bank, catching the heavy pile of her dress and boots. "No," she whispered, lunging. But she was too late. The current gripped the clothes, pulling them, heavy and sodden, into the center. They swirled once and were drawn over the precipice, vanishing downstream. She cried out, a small, choked sound. She scrambled to the edge. She could see them, snagged on a tangle of roots 20 feet below, completely out of reach. Her dress, her boots, her stockings, everything. She was stranded, in the middle of the Apache wilderness, in nothing but a thin, wet chemise that now clung to her body like a second skin. She backed away from the pool, her heart hammering. She huddled behind a boulder, her arms wrapped around her knees, shaking. She was no longer just afraid. She was humiliated. The rumors, the whispers, they were all true now. In a way, she was the foolish white woman, exposed, ridiculous, a virgin, naked by mistake. She did not know how long she sat there, shivering, praying he would not come back. She heard the scrape of a moccasin on stone. She froze. Nakai rounded the boulder. He stopped. Time ceased to move. He saw her. He saw her huddled small, her pale skin luminous in the half-light, the wet cotton hiding nothing. He saw her terror. He saw her shame. His eyes, dark and sharp, took in the scene, the empty bank, the water, and the woman. Evelyn could not breathe. She wanted to die. She wanted the earth to swallow her. She saw his eyes on her, and it was a physical blow. He did not look away immediately. He assessed the situation, and then he did something that saved her. He turned his back. He turned it completely, presenting her with a broad, solid expanse of his shoulders. He stood that way for a full 10 seconds. She heard the sound of leather moving. He unslung his rifle and laid it on the ground. She heard the clink of his knife belt as he unbuckled it. He was removing his heavy deerskin shirt, the one he wore over his cloth one. He turned, but only halfway, his face averted. He held out the folded deerskin cloak. He did not toss it. He walked forward and placed it carefully on a flat rock that was between them, but closer to her. Beside it, he placed his heavy sheath knife. Then he turned his back again. His hand, as he let it fall to his side, trembled, just once. "Cover yourself," he said. His voice was thick, rougher than usual. He walked to the mouth of the small alcove and sat, facing out, his rifle across his knees. A sentinel. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely move. She darted forward, grabbing the deerskin. It was heavy and warm from his body. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and the dry, clean scent of the desert. She pulled it over her head. It was huge. It fell to her knees, swallowing her completely. A fortress of leather. She grabbed the knife and secured it in the belt of the cloak. She was covered, but she was crying, hot, silent tears of shame and a strange, profound relief. She walked haltingly until she was standing behind him. He did not turn. My clothes," she stammered, her voice thick. "The water, it took them." "I saw," he said to the canyon wall. The tears came faster. "I am a fool. I am what they say I am." The words tore out of her. "They whisper that I follow you, that I am unclean. Now, they will see me in this. They will laugh. They will know I am a joke." Her words stopped him. He was a warrior. He understood war and drought and hunger. He did not understand this white world shame. He turned, slowly. He did not stand. He sat and looked up at her. His eyes were not on her body, hidden by the cloak. His eyes were fixed on her face, on her tears. "Dignity is not in cloth," he said, his voice quiet. "Certain, it is in the eyes. I look at you." He touched his own temple. "I do not see a fool. I see the woman who faced Malloy. I see the woman who signed her name for Dominga. I see the teacher who writes 2 on her board." He shook his head, confused by her logic. "The cloth is wind. The eyes see the stone. I see the stone." Evelyn stopped crying. She stared at him. He had seen her, exposed and terrified. He had not mocked her. He had not pitied her. He had not taken advantage of her. He had given her his covering, turned his back, and then he had defined her by her courage, not her body. He had given her back her dignity. The moment stretched, quiet and safe. He stood up, turning back to the mission. "We must find the proof." She nodded, pulling the cloak tighter. It felt like armor. They returned to the rock face by the spring. This time, Nakai looked closer, at the spot where the water bubbled up. He used his knife, scraping away the dark, wet algae. "Here," he said. Evelyn knelt beside him. There it was, a thick, milky white vein, shot through with green mineral, running deep into the rock. It was not the same red sandstone. It was different. It was a fissure. "This is the artery," Nakai said, his finger tracing it. Evelyn's mind, the teacher's mind, sparked. "It is a fault line, a channel, the main aquifer. It travels through this fissure. This is its heart." She looked up at the wall, seeing where the blasting marks would go if they used dynamite anywhere along this line. "And they sever the heart." Nakai finished. "The spring dies, and the well in your town, it is fed by the same heart. It will die too." "This was it. This was the proof." Evelyn fumbled for her notebook and pencil, her hands still shaking. She began to sketch, frantically. She drew the rock wall, the line of the strata, the shape of the mineral vein. She wrote notes in the margin: geological fissure, main aquifer channel, highly unstable. Blasting will sever water source. Beside her, Nakai took his own knife. On the flat surface of the rock, he carved a small, powerful symbol, a circle, with a lightning-like line through it, his clan's mark for the water heart. They both finished at the same time. They looked at her frantic, scientific scribbles, and at his simple, spiritual carving. They were two different worlds, describing the exact same truth. A small, wild bubble of laughter escaped Evelyn's throat. It was relief and exhaustion, and a strange, sudden joy. "I think yours is clearer," she said. Nakai looked at her. Her hair was damp and tangled. Her face was smudged with mud. She was swimming in his deerskin cloak, and she was laughing. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the first time she had ever seen it. It changed his entire face. The cloak, heavy on her small frame, was slipping from her shoulder. The leather tie at the neck was loose. "It is falling," she said, fumbling with the thong. "Hold still." He stepped in front of her. He was very close. She could feel the heat from his body. He took the two ends of the leather tie. His knuckles brushed her collarbone. A brief, dry heat. But his fingers, skilled and precise, did not touch her skin. He tied a deft, strong knot. The cloak was secure. "We go now," he said, his voice back to its rough texture, "before Crowder's men grow bold." The journey back was different. She did not stumble as much. He led her on an easier path. They were not a warrior and a teacher. They were two people, bound by a shared secret and a shared respect. They reached the edge of Dust Mercy as the last light faded. The lights of the gilded cage were a sick yellow in the twilight. "You must not be seen," she said, stopping him in the shadows of the blacksmith's forge. "They will see you," he replied, looking at the cloak. "They will know." "Let them," she said. She clutched the heavy leather. It was her only covering. "I must keep this until I can find another dress." He nodded. He understood. This was her new armor. "Tomorrow," he said. "Noon. Bring your book to Deacon Hale's forge. Bring Dominga. I will have my grandmother's word. We will make the town listen." He turned and blended into the shadows, gone as if he had never been. Evelyn clutched the warm cloak and slipped through the dark alley toward her small room, her heart pounding with a new, terrifying resolve. 5 days remained. The morning light was a judgment. Evelyn had spent a sleepless night. She had found a plain gray skirt and blouse in her trunk, meager replacements for her lost dress. She wore the wooden amulet Nakai had given her beneath the blouse, the leather thong a secret against her skin. At noon, she met Dominga at Deacon Hale's forge. The air inside was thick with the smell of coal smoke and quenching iron. Deacon was shoeing a horse, his massive arms glistening with sweat. He finished, his face grim, and hung his hammer. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have called this meeting. I will stand with you." Evelyn looked at Dominga, her courage failing. "How do we even start? Malloy will just shut us down." He cannot shut down the fire bell, Deacon said. He strode to the thick rope hanging by the forge door. It is the only voice in this town that does not belong to the sheriff. When I ring this, they must come. He took the rope and pulled. The sound was not a polite summons. It was a deep, resonant clang that shattered the midday heat. It was a sound of alarm, of fire, of invasion. He pulled it again and again, the heavy iron note demanding attention. The town responded. Doors flew open. People poured out of the mercantile and the saloon, their faces pale with anxiety. Sheriff Malloy and Lance Crowder burst from the jailhouse, their hands on their pistols. "What is the meaning of this? Hail!" Malloy bellowed, his face flushing with rage. "You are inciting a panic." "This is a town meeting, Sheriff," Deacon said. He stood solid as his own anvil, flanked by Evelyn and Dominga. "The people have a right to hear, and they have a right to see." "See what?" a rancher named Jeb shouted, pushing through the crowd. "What is this nonsense?" "You are being lied to," Evelyn called out, her voice high and clear in the sudden silence. All eyes turned to her. The whispers began immediately. "That is the one, the Apache lover." "Look at her. No shame." "You think this railroad is your salvation?" Evelyn continued, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "It is a lie. Baron Rusk is not just taking water from the gap. He is going to destroy the source. Your town well will be dry sand within a month of his blasting. I have seen the proof." She held up her notebook, the one with the drawings of the aquifer. Jeb the rancher laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Proof that is a girl's scribbling. We need that railroad. Miss Shaw, my cattle are dying of thirst. Rusk promised us water, and he promised us business." The mercantile owner, Mr. Harris, nodded. "He is right. This town is dying, and you are trying to scare away the only cure." The crowd divided, arguing among themselves. The ranchers and merchants, desperate for the railroad's money, glared at her. The poorer families, the mothers who relied on the town well, looked at each other, a new, sharp fear in their eyes. "It is not just the water." Dominga's voice cut through the noise, low and dangerous. "To do it, he is dynamiting the Apache burial ground. He is digging up their grandfathers to lay his tracks." A collective gasp went up. This was a different kind of violation. "Who cares about an Indian graveyard?" Jeb roared, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. "We are talking about survival." "She is lying," Malloy shouted, seizing the moment. "She is in league with them. Where is her proof? A drawing. Where is her Apache warrior now?" As if summoned by the name, Nakai stepped out of the alley. He walked into the center of the street. He was banished. He was in the sunlight. He was unarmed, save for the knife on his belt. The crowd fell back, a wave of fear and surprise. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at Evelyn. He walked to her side, to stand with her and Deacon Hale. He said nothing. His presence was his testimony. Lance Crowder had been waiting for this. He saw his target, the ghost from the ridge, standing in the open, defiant. This was a gift. "Apache murderer!" Crowder screamed, pulling the pistol from his coat. "He is attacking!" He aimed his pistol directly at Nakai's chest. He fired. It happened in a fraction of a second. Evelyn screamed. Deacon Hale, standing closest to Nakai, moved with a speed that belied his size. He did not have time to think. He just moved. He shoved Nakai hard, pushing him out of the bullet's path, and stepped into the space where Nakai had been. The bullet intended for Nakai's heart slammed into Deacon Hale's shoulder. The sound of the shot was huge, echoing flatly between the buildings. Deacon grunted, a deep, shocked sound, and staggered back, clutching his arm. Blood, dark and thick, instantly soaked his shirt. The street was dead silent. Crowder's pistol was smoking. Nakai, reacting with pure, violent instinct, grabbed Evelyn, throwing her to the ground behind the heavy forge anvil. He pulled his own knife and crouched, placing himself between her and Crowder, his face a mask of killing rage. Crowder, seeing Hale down, not Nakai, cursed. He had not wanted this. He had shot the blacksmith, a respected armed forces veteran, in front of the entire town. He had a knife, Crowder yelled, pointing at Nakai, trying to justify the shot. He was going for the girl. He was standing still, Dominga screamed from the saloon doorway, her voice ringing with pure hatred. You shot Deacon! You shot him in cold blood! The crowd, even Jeb the rancher, looked at Deacon, bleeding in the dust. They looked at Crowder. This was not law. This was an execution. Malloy, seeing the mood shatter, panicked. It was an accident. Crowder was defending himself. Everyone, go home. This meeting is over. Evelyn scrambled from behind the anvil, her fear replaced by a cold, precise rage. Get him inside. Get him in the forge now. She and Dominga helped Deacon, who was pale and cursing, into his own workshop. The crowd did not disperse. They gathered in small, angry knots, watching the sheriff's office. The balance had shattered. Inside the forge, Evelyn's nursing skills took over. Dominga, hot water, whiskey, all the clean rags you have. She cut away Deacon's bloody shirt. The bullet was lodged deep in the muscle of his shoulder. It was ugly. He is a monster, Evelyn whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to pack the wound. He tried to kill Nakai. He shot you. Now you see. Deacon grunted, his face pale with sweat. They will not stop. Not for anything. Nakai was gone. He had vanished back into the alleys. But Evelyn knew he was watching. Her anger was cold now. They had tried to murder a man in the street. They had shot a good man who stood in their way. The law was the criminal. She had to go over their heads. Keep him stable, she told Dominga, who was holding a compress to the wound. I will be back. She ran from the forge. She did not run to her schoolhouse. She ran to the telegraph office. It was a small, dusty shack at the end of town, run by a weedy man named Peters, who always looked as if he were about to sneeze. Evelyn burst in, throwing her last few coins on the counter. I need to send a message to the territorial lawyer in Prescott. Now. Peters looked up, his eyes nervous. He looked past her, toward the sheriff's office. Miss Shaw, I do not know. There is a lot of interference on the line today. Send it. Evelyn's voice was low and flat. She grabbed a message pad. Her pencil flew. Baron Rusk and Lance Crowder violating public water rights, Ancestors Gap. Geological proof aquifer will be destroyed. Fired on unarmed citizens in Dust Mercy. Deacon Hale shot in broad daylight. Request immediate state intervention. Halt all blasting. She signed her name. Send it now, she commanded. I am watching you send it. Peters, sweating, reluctantly turned to his key. His fingers tapped out the Morse code, slow and deliberate. The message went out onto the wire. As soon as Evelyn left, Peters sighed. He waited 2 minutes. Then he tapped out a second, much shorter message, to a private address in Tucson Baron Rusk's regional office. Teacher just wired Prescott lawyer. Knows about aquifer. Crowder shot Hale in public. Meeting. Town is turning. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small cloth bag of coins. His supplemental salary. He had done his job. Rusk now knew what she knew. And he knew what the lawyer knew. Evelyn walked back toward the forge, her heart pounding with a desperate, fragile hope. Help was coming. It had to be. She stopped. The air had changed. The sky, a clear, brutal blue moments before, was turning a sickly yellow-brown. The wind, which had been a low moan, was rising, carrying a fine grit that stung her face. Deacon Hale, propped up in the forge doorway, looked past her. His face, already pale, went gray. What is it? She asked. Dust, he whispered. A bad one. Level 8, maybe 9. Get inside. Get under cover. The world went from day to night in 10 seconds. A solid wall of sand and grit hit Dust mercy. It was not a wind. It was a physical, screaming thing. The air was unbreathable. Evelyn was thrown against the wall of the forge, the force stealing her breath. She heard the wood of the mercantile groaning. "The children," she cried, her voice stolen by the roar. "Thomas, the schoolhouse?" She tried to run into the street, but the wind was a solid wall. She could not see her own hands. She heard a high, thin wail, a sound of pure terror. It was Maria, Thomas's mother. She was clinging to a veranda post, her body shielding her son, but the boy was exposed, his small chest heaving. The dust was thick, a suffocating powder. He was having an asthma attack, and he was breathing pure earth. He cannot breathe," Maria shrieked. Evelyn tried to move toward them, but she was blind. Suddenly, a hand, hard as iron, grabbed her arm. It was Nakai. He had not left. He had been watching, waiting. He put his mouth to her ear, shouting over the storm. "The houses will not hold the ancient caves this way." He moved to Maria, lifting the choking boy from her arms as if he weighed nothing. "Come!" He became their anchor. He was the only one who could see, the only one who knew the ground. He gathered the Hale girls, who were huddled by their father's forge. He found 2 other families, the poorest, their flimsy shacks already beginning to splinter. He led a small, terrified procession, heads down, into the teeth of the storm, toward the cliffs at the edge of town. He brought them to a shallow, wide cave, a shelter his people had used for centuries. Inside, the roar of the wind was muffled, but the air was still thick with dust. It was chaos. Evelyn immediately went to Thomas. He was turning blue. "He is not breathing," Maria cried. "His lungs are closing," Evelyn said, her mind racing. Her supplies, her laudanum, her syrups were all in the clinic. A world away. A fire. "We need steam. Now." Nakai was already working. He had dry tinder in his pouch, in the shelter of the cave. He shielded a spark, cousining a small, smokeless fire to life. He produced a small, battered pot from his pack. "2," he said, handing her his water skin. As they worked, another woman cried out. It was a young woman Evelyn vaguely recognized, the wife of a prospector. She was hugely pregnant, and she was clutching her belly, her face a mask of pain and terror. "It is coming!" she screamed, gripping Evelyn's arm. "The baby! It is coming now!" The storm raged. A child was dying. A baby was being born. Evelyn looked at Nakai over the small fire, her eyes wide with a terrible, helpless panic. He did not panic. He just looked at her, his gaze steady, and gave a single, certain nod. He trusted her. That nod was like a steel rod slipped down her spine. She took a breath. She was the teacher. She was the nurse. "Maria," she commanded, her voice calm and clear. "Hold Thomas over the pot. We will make a tent with this blanket. Hold his head in the steam. Do not let him go." She turned to the pregnant woman. "I am here," she said, taking her hand. "My name is Evelyn. I am here. You must push." For hours, the storm screamed. Inside the cave, Evelyn Shaw, the woman they had whispered about, the woman they had shunned, worked. She moved between the choking boy and the laboring mother. Nakai held the water. He held the blankets. He kept the fire alive. He helped Maria hold her son steady in the life-giving steam. Slowly, agonizingly, Thomas's breathing, which had been a high, thin whistle, began to ease, to deepen. And just as the wind outside reached a fever pitch, a new sound joined it. The thin, angry, glorious wail of a healthy baby. Evelyn, covered in sweat and red dust, laughed, a raw, exhausted sound. She cleaned the child and placed him on his mother's chest. The other people in the cave, the ones who had looked away from her in the street, stared. They saw the blood on her arms. They saw the grit in her hair. They saw the fierce, tired light in her eyes. She was not a native lover. She was a life-bringer. She was the one who had saved them. The storm broke at dawn. The town was half buried in red sand, the landscape scoured and new. As the families emerged, blinking, into the clean-washed, brutal air, they looked at Nakai. He was not a raider. He was not a ghost. He was the man who knew where the safe place was. He was the one who had saved their children. Maria walked up to Evelyn. She said nothing. She was holding Thomas, who was breathing. She just took Evelyn's hand, the one stained with blood and dust, and kissed it. Evelyn was exhausted, walking back to her clinic. She had to check on Deacon. Nakai appeared beside her, moving silently through the drifted sand. "You did well," he said. "We did well," she corrected. She was too tired to be formal. "My grandmother, Nalin, she heard of the meeting. She heard the shot. She heard the storm." He said, "She knows what you did in the cave." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "She says your spirit is strong. She asks for you. She invites you to the ceremony of the water, tonight, to understand what it is we are fighting for." Evelyn looked at him. This was not a plea. It was an honor. This was the bridge she had been seeking. "I will come," she said. She thought of the telegraph message. Surely, by now, it had arrived. Help must be on the way. The balance was tilting. They had lost the public meeting. But in the fire and the dust, they had won the people. She looked at the sheriff's office, its door half blocked by a dune of red sand. 3 days remained. That night, Nakai came for her. He appeared at her back window, a shadow in the moonlight. He did not speak, only beckoned. Evelyn, wrapped in a dark shawl Dominga had given her, followed him. He led her deep into Ancestor's Gap, to a place where the stream widened into a pool, so clear it reflected the stars like a second sky. His people were gathered, sitting in a silent circle around the water's edge. An old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, sat at the head. Nalin, Nakai's grandmother. Evelyn's breath caught. She was an outsider, a white woman, the cause of so much trouble. She expected hostility. Nalin looked up as she approached. Her eyes were as clear as the water. She did not smile, but she nodded. A gesture of acknowledgement. She pointed to a spot just outside the sacred circle of stones. Evelyn sat, her back straight, her hands folded. She was a guest. She would not intrude. The ceremony began. It was not a dance. It was a song, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was a story of the water, of how it was the blood of the ancestors, how it gave life to the people, how it held their memory. Nakai stood. He walked to the water's edge. He spoke, his voice clear and strong in his own language, a language Evelyn was beginning to recognize. He was making a vow. She did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. He was binding himself to this place. He looked across the circle, and his eyes found hers. He switched to English, so she would be a witness. "I am Nakai, of the Eagle Clan," he said, his voice echoing slightly from the rocks. "The water is our blood. I will protect this blood. I will protect this gap. I will not let it be broken." He knelt, cupped his hands in the pool, and drank. The ceremony was over. As the people dispersed quietly into the night, Nalin walked over to Evelyn. The old woman studied her face in the starlight. "You have a strong spirit," Nalin said, her English slow and precise. "You fight like an Apache, but you have a white woman's heart. It breaks too easily." I only want what is just," Evelyn stammered. "Justice is not given." Nalin said, "It is made, like a basket or an arrow. You must make it." She touched the amulet hidden beneath Evelyn's shawl. "My grandson sees you. Do not fail what he sees." Evelyn returned to Dust Mercy just before dawn, her heart filled with a fragile, sacred hope. The fight was not just about rock and minerals. It was about blood and spirit. Her first stop was the telegraph office. She had to know if the lawyer from Prescott had replied. The door was unlocked. The weedy operator, Peters, was not there. Instead, a deputy sat in the chair, his boots on the desk. "What do you want, Miss Shaw?" he sneered. "A reply to my telegram." The deputy laughed. He picked up a piece of paper from the desk and held it out. "Oh, you got a reply." Evelyn seized it. Her heart leaped. It was a formal message. "Receipt of your complaint. All blasting operations by Rusk Expansion Company are hereby ordered to cease pending a full territorial investigation." "He did it," she breathed. "He is stopping them. It is over." She ran from the office, waving the paper. "It is over. He is stopping them." She ran straight to the sheriff's office, where Malloy and Crowder were standing on the boardwalk, drinking coffee. "You cannot stop it," she cried, thrusting the paper at him. "It is a legal order. From Prescott, you have to stop." Sheriff Malloy took the paper. He read it slowly. Crowder read it over his shoulder, his face darkening. Malloy looked at Evelyn. He smiled, a slow, ugly smile. He began to tear the paper, once, twice, and let the pieces fall to the dusty boardwalk. "Paper," Malloy said, his voice thick with amusement. "A piece of paper from a man 100 miles away." He gestured down the street. "You know what stops dynamite? Miss Shaw." A heavy wagon, pulled by 6 mules, was rumbling into town. It was followed by another, and another. A full crew of 20 rough-looking men, graders and blasters, rode alongside. On the bed of the first wagon, covered by a tarp, was a long, sinister, brass-barreled shape. "That," Malloy said, "stops paper." Crowder's men pulled the tarp back, revealing a Gatling gun. They wheeled it onto the boardwalk and positioned it to cover the entire length of the main street. "You are too late, teacher," Crowder said, his voice a low growl. "Mr. Rusk was informed of your little message. He understands the value of time. He has moved up the schedule." A deputy emerged and nailed a new, massive poster to the wall. "Notice, blasting of Ancestors Gap will commence tomorrow, 5 a.m. By order of the Rusk Expansion Company, all citizens are to remain indoors for their safety. All interference will be met with lethal force." The ultimatum of 3 days had vanished. The countdown was now a matter of hours. The forge was a room of shadows and despair. Deacon Hale sat on his cot, his arm in a fresh sling. Dominga stood by the cold forge, her arms crossed. Evelyn paced, her fists clenched, the torn pieces of the telegram in her hand. "It is my fault," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It is all my fault. I sent the telegram. I forced his hand. I brought this on us. He is moving fast because of me. He brought that gun because of me." "He was always bringing the gun. Chica," Dominga said, but her voice was tired. "No," Evelyn said, tears of rage and guilt burning her eyes. "I made it worse. I have put you all in danger. Deacon is shot. The town—" She stopped pacing. "If it is me he is afraid of, me and Nakai, then maybe, She looked at Dominga. "If I went to them, if I went to Crowder, if I turned myself in, if I said I lied, that the aquifer was fine, maybe he would stop to save the town." "Do not be a fool," Deacon growled from the cot. "He would take you, and he would blast the gap anyway. He would just have a celebration while he did it." The back door of the forge scraped open. Nakai slipped inside. He had heard. His face was like carved stone. "No," he said, his voice flat and cold. Evelyn turned to him, Nakai, I have to... No. He stepped toward her. You do not trade people. You are not a commodity. We do not sacrifice our own to stop them. His eyes were hard. This is not your fault. This is his greed. His certainty calmed her panic, but her guilt remained. She looked at Deacon, pale with pain. She looked at Nakai. He had been checking on Deacon. His hand, the one he had used to push himself up after Deacon shoved him from the bullet's path, was scraped raw, the knuckles bloody. You are hurt, she said, her voice dropping. He looked at his hand as if just noticing it. It is nothing. It is not nothing. She went to her nursing bag, which was now kept at the forge. She pulled out a clean cloth and a small bottle of carbolic. Sit. He did not argue. He sat on a stool. She knelt in front of him, taking his hand. His skin was rough, calloused, hot. She gently began to clean the raw, grit-filled abrasions. He did not flinch, but she felt the muscles in his forearm tense. The world shrank. The forge, the Gatling gun, the coming dawn. It all faded, replaced by the simple, quiet intimacy of this act. Her touch was gentle. His hand was strong. She finished cleaning and began to wrap a clean bandage around his knuckles. Her head was bent to her task. His gaze was on her, on the curve of her neck, on the intensity of her expression. She finished, her fingers tying the knot. Her hand lingered on his, just for a second. She looked up. His eyes met hers. There was no sound but the hiss of the forge's embers. It was not a question. It was a fact. He leaned in. She met him. It was not a desperate, frantic kiss. It was firm and dry and slow. It tasted of dust and iron and a desperate, shared resolve. It was a kiss that did not demand, but affirmed, I am here. You are here. We are in this. It was a moment of belonging in a world that was trying to tear them apart. It lasted only a moment. They pulled back. The air in the forge was different, charged and still. A sudden commotion from the street shattered the spell. Shouting. Deacon moved to the cracked window. Damn them all, he breathed. Evelyn and Nakai ran to the door, peering out. Malloy's deputies were nailing up new flyers, not printed posters, but crude, hand-drawn leaflets. The drawing was a cruel, leering caricature. It showed a wild-eyed, savage-looking Nakai and a white woman, Evelyn, her dress half-torn, swooning in his arms. The text was simple and brutal. Concerned citizens, is this who you trust your town to? A woman of loose morals who consorts with savages in the dark. A woman who has brought a war party to our doorstep. She has made her choice. Now you must make yours. The whispers, the rumors, the shame she had felt at the hot spring, it was all here, made public, made official. It was a smear, an attack on her last line of defense, her honor. He is not just trying to win, Evelyn said, her voice a dead, cold whisper. He is trying to destroy me. They retreated into the forge, the four of them Deacon, one armed but his eyes burning. Dominga, her hand resting on the knife in her boot. Evelyn, pale but rigid with a new, cold fury. And Nakai, his bandaged hand clenched into a fist. He wants to break her, so the town breaks, Dominga said. If they do not trust her, they will not follow her. They will let him blast. The back door opened again. A young Apache boy, no more than 16, slipped in. It was Taji, Nakai's cousin. Nakai, he said, speaking quickly in their language, then switching to English for the others. They have the dynamite. It is in the old assay office, by the planned tracks. Only 2 guards on the building, but... He looked at Deacon. The big gun, the one that shoots many times. It covers the whole street. Then we cannot go down the street, Deacon said. We do not need to stop the gun, Nakai said, his mind working. The gun is a threat. The dynamite is the weapon. We do not need to fight his army. We need to stop the blast." "Steal the dynamite?" Evelyn asked. "No," Nakai said. "Too heavy. Too much. We take what makes it live." He looked at Evelyn. "The blasting caps. The detonators. Without them, the dynamite is just hard clay." A plan began to form, desperate and sharp. "Dominga," Nakai said, "your saloon, it has a back way onto the alley." "And a cellar that runs under the boardwalk," she said, catching his thought. "Deacon, you are the lookout. You know the sound of this town. You will be our eyes from the bell tower." Nakai commanded. "I can do that." Deacon nodded. "Taji, you are fast. You will have the horses ready in the canyon, in case we have to run." The boy nodded, his eyes bright. "It leaves us," Nakai said, looking at Evelyn. "Me," she said, her heart pounding. "Nakai, I am not a warrior. I will slow you down." "You are not a warrior," he agreed. "You are the one who can read. Crowder is smart. He will not leave all the caps in one box. He will have a schedule, a map. We need the caps, and we need his plan." He looked at the small clock ticking on Deacon's wall. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. "The blast is at 5, Nakai said. "They will move the caps to the site at 4. He looked at the group. "We go at midnight." The countdown had begun. 12 hours. The town of Dust Mercy was a dry tinderbox, waiting for a spark. It held its breath under the brass eye of the Gatling gun. Midnight came, cold and absolute. Deacon Hale, his left arm bound tight to his chest, climbed the inside ladder of the church tower. He carried a long-range buffalo rifle, heavy and balanced. He settled himself at the narrow window. The whole street laid out below him like a shooting gallery. He was one-armed, but his remaining eye was sharp. He was the lookout. In the back alley of the Gilded Cage, Dominga knelt over a heavy iron bucket. She was not praying. She was layering damp straw, oil-soaked rags, and sulfur. She placed it by the cellar door that opened beneath the boardwalk, aimed toward the Gatling gun crew. She waited. Taji, young and fast, moved through the shadows, checking the alleyways. He was the runner. Nakai and Evelyn moved as one shadow. They reached the alley behind the telegraph office. The street was empty, but the 2 guards on the assay office, 100 yards down, were visible. A third man sat high on a specially built watchtower, his rifle silhouetted against the stars. "Now," Nakai whispered. It began. From the bell tower, Deacon Hale sighted on the man in the watchtower. He did not fire. He waited. Dominga struck a match. The smudge pot caught, belching a thick, acrid smoke. She kicked the cellar door open. The smoke, heavy and oily, poured out at street level, rolling across the dust, enveloping the Gatling gun and the men guarding it. Coughing, confused shouts erupted. "What is that fire?" The guards by the assay office shifted nervously, peering into the man-made fog. The man in the watchtower stood up, trying to see the source of the commotion. That was his mistake. From the church, Deacon Hale's rifle cracked, 1 shot. The man in the tower dropped his own rifle, clutched his chest, and toppled silently into the alley below. The tower was blind. Under cover of the gunshot's echo, Evelyn Shaw ran. She crossed the open space to the telegraph office, Nakai covering her from the darkness. She slipped the lock, her hands shaking. She found the key, her fingers identifying the metal contours in the dark. She began to tap. It was a frantic, desperate message, sent to no one, meant only for the guards. "Apache raid, West Ridge. Crowder's men. Ambushed. Send help." The 2 guards at the assay office heard the tapping. They looked at each other, then at the smoke, then at the empty tower. Panic set in. "The tower guard is down," one shouted. "They are signaling for help. It is a coordinated attack." "We have to protect the gun," the other yelled, and they both ran. abandoning their post, sprinting toward the chaos of the Gatling gun crew. The path was clear. In Nakai, Evelyn and Tazi converged on the assay office. The door was thick, the lock heavy. Nakai did not bother picking it. He put his shoulder to the wood, and the frame splintered. They poured inside, shutting the door. Nakai lit a small, shielded lantern. The office was filled with crates, dynamite, but the boxes were sealed. "The desk," Nakai ordered. Evelyn was already there, pulling open drawers, papers, invoices, and a blasting schedule. She scanned it. "Here, Section 4. Ancestors Gap. Sunrise." It lists the charges, and... Taji was at the crates. "Nakai, these are not just dynamite. They are already wired. They are charges, ready to be placed." "The caps," Nakai said, his voice urgent. The door burst open. Lance Crowder stood there, a wide, triumphant smile on his face. He held a detonator in his hand. Behind him stood 6 of his men, rifles leveled. "Looking for this teacher?" Crowder asked. They were caught. It had been a trap. Taji, with a warrior's cry, lunged at Crowder. It was pure instinct, and it was a mistake. A mercenary slammed the butt of his rifle into the boy's temple. Taji crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Taji!" Nakai roared. Moving forward, the sound of 6 rifles being cocked stopped him cold. Ah, Crowder cooed. "No sudden movements. You really are fools." He kicked Tazi's still form. "I knew you would come. You are so predictable." One of his men dragged Evelyn from the desk, tying her hands with a rough speed. "We found her, boss, just like you said." "Of course you did," Crowder said. "You see, Miss Shaw, you are not very good at this. Your little telegraph trick very clever, but I was already here. I have been waiting." He stepped aside. In the corner sat the weedy telegraph operator, Peters tied to a chair, his face pale with terror. "Mister, Peters here sent your little message to Prescott," Crowder said conversationally. "And then he sent my message to my men, telling them to get here fast. I have been expecting you for hours." He pointed to a large crate in the center of the room. Wires ran from it, leading to a small clockwork timer. The clock was ticking. "This is the auxiliary fuse," Crowder explained as if to a child. "It is connected to all the blasting caps in this room. In about..." He checked his watch. 5 minutes. It will go off. It will destroy this office, and all the evidence. It will not set off the main blast at the Gap. Of course, that is for sunrise. This is just housekeeping." His men grabbed Evelyn, dragging her outside, her hands tied behind her. They pulled Nakai out after her, his hands raised. Crowder pressed the cold barrel of his pistol to Evelyn's temple. The street was lit by the dim, smoky lanterns. "And now, Nakai," Crowder said, his voice dropping. "The final lesson, a choice." He nodded toward the assay office, where the timer was ticking. "You can run in there. You are fast. You might even be able to stop that fuse. It would be a pity, but you could do it. You could save the detonators, save your precious water for another day. Maybe." He pressed the pistol harder against Evelyn's skin. She winced. "Or," Crowder whispered, "you can save her, but you cannot do both. So, what is it, warrior? The duty you swore to, or the woman you lay with?" He was torturing him. He wanted to see him break. Nakai looked at Evelyn. Her face was pale, but she was not crying. She was staring at him, her eyes fierce. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No. The water." Nakai was frozen. Hoso, Harmony, the Gap, his brother's blood, the ceremony, Evelyn, the kiss. His world was tearing in two. He looked at Crowder, his face a mask of defeat. Slowly, agonizingly, he unslung his rifle. He let it drop to the dust. He raised his hands. "You win," Nakai said, his voice broken. "Let her go." Crowder's smile was a terrible thing. He had won. He had broken him. "I knew it." He laughed. "I knew you were just a man." The guard holding Evelyn laughed too, relieved. He loosened his grip on her arm to mock her. "Hear that? Teach her your man." Evelyn had been waiting. She was not a warrior. She was a nurse, and she always carried her tools. Her hands, tied at the wrist, fumbled in the small pocket of her skirt. Her fingers found it a thin, steel suture needle, 4 inches long, sharp as a razor. As the guard laughed, she drove her hands backward and up, plunging the needle deep into the soft flesh of his neck, just behind the ear. The man's laugh turned into a wet, choked gasp. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock, his hands flying to his neck. He released her. He fell. "Now!" Evelyn screamed. All hell broke loose. Nakai did not go for his rifle. He moved like a striking snake, closing the distance to Crowder. Deacon Hale, in the church tower, saw the chaos. He saw the Gatling gun crew, now clear of the smoke, swinging the heavy brass gun toward the assay office. Deacon aimed. He was not aiming for a man. He was aiming for the heavy, brass-bound ammunition box that fed the weapon. He fired. The .50 caliber slug hit the box, splintering the wood, severing the ammunition belt. The Gatling gun was useless. At the same moment, Dominga, who had been watching from the alley, saw her chance. The main dynamite pallet, the one for the 5 o'clock blast, was sitting on a wagon. Its horses hitched. The 2 guards, distracted by the fighting, were looking toward Nakai. Dominga stepped out of the shadows. She shot both guards, 1, 2, without hesitation. She grabbed the wagon's reins, whipped the horses, and drove the wagon, carrying tons of high explosives, past the saloon and down the main street, away from the gap. The mercenaries were confused. Their big gun was silent. Their dynamite was gone. Their leader was under attack. Taji, his head bleeding, woke up. He saw the fight and launched himself at the nearest mercenary, biting and kicking. It all came down to the 2 men, in the dust, between the buildings. Crowder fired his pistol, but Nakai was already inside the shot. He knocked the gun away. It was hand to hand. Crowder was bigger, fueled by rage. Nakai was faster, fueled by a cold, precise fury. They smashed against the walls, trading brutal blows. Crowder pulled a heavy Bowie knife. "You should have died like your little brother," he snarled, slashing at Nakai's throat. Nakai froze, parrying the blade. "What did you say?" "That is right," Crowder boasted. Seeing the opening he had created, he lunged. "Taji, the first one, your little brother Rusk paid me extra for that. He was scouting the gap, just like you. I shot him in the back, watched him bleed out, just like you will." The confession. Nakai's rage did not explode. It turned to ice. Ho-ho, not vengeance, justice. He stopped fighting like a brawler. He began to fight like an Apache. He moved, using Crowder's own weight against him. He disarmed him, the knife skittering across the dust. He broke Crowder's wrist. He landed a series of precise, devastating blows to Crowder's throat and ribs. Crowder collapsed, choking. Nakai knelt over him, his knife in his hand. He pressed it to Crowder's throat. He saw his brother's face. He saw the smoking totem. "Nakai, do not," Evelyn screamed. He held the blade there, his hand shaking. Then he let out a long breath. He would not become the thing he was fighting. He did not kill him. He took Crowder's own belt and a set of ropes from a dead mercenary. He trussed him up, tightly, professionally. A living witness. Evelyn ran to him. "It is over," she said, her voice shaking. "We did it." "No," Nakai said, his face grim. He looked at the assay office. Taji stumbled out, holding his head. "Nakai, the fuse. It is still going. I cannot stop it." Nakai ran into the office. Evelyn was right behind him. They saw it, a complex mesh of wires, all leading to the crates of blasting caps, and in the center, a small clockwork timer, ticking down. The clock read 1 minute, 30 seconds. 90 seconds. The clock was a tiny, clicking heart, counting down to a massive death. Nakai did not try to disarm it. Crowder's confession, the boast of a trap, meant the wires were a lie. "We move it," he said, his voice a low command. He jammed his shoulder against the heavy wooden crate. It did not budge. It was bolted to the floor. "Taji!" he yelled. The boy, shaking, threw his weight next to Nakai. The wood groaned. "Where?" Evelyn cried, her eyes fixed on the ticking clock. "It will take down the whole street." "The town well," Nakai grunted, his muscles straining. "Water. We sink it. The water will smother the blast." 70 seconds. They ripped the crate from the floor with a scream of tortured metal. It was heavier than a coffin, a dead weight of brass and copper and destruction. They half lifted, half dragged it from the assay office. The street was a war zone. Dominga was gone with the dynamite wagon. Deacon was a ghost in the tower. Crowder's men were dead or scattered, defeated by the coordinated chaos. But Crowder himself, tied and gagged, watched them, his eyes wide with a new, sudden terror. He knew what was in the crate. He knew it was unstable. "Evelyn ahead," Nakai roared. She ran, clearing the path to the heavy stone cistern that marked the town well. 30 yards away. 60 seconds. They staggered into the open. Nakai and Taji, their feet slipping in the dust, their lungs burning. They were a 3-man procession, carrying a bomb through the heart of the town they were trying to save. Evelyn, her hands bloody, her face smeared with sweat and smoke, reached the well. "It is covered." The heavy oak lid was bolted down. As Nakai and Taji dropped the crate, the ground did not just tremble. It heaved. It was not the dynamite. It was the earth itself, protesting, an aftershock from the storm, or a deeper shift in the fault line she had seen. The land itself was breaking. A jagged black fissure, a crack wide enough to swallow a horse, opened up, running from the corner of the saloon directly to the foundation of the town well. The stone cistern groaned. The ground beneath the heavy crate of detonators began to crumble. "Nakai!" Evelyn screamed. The crate slid, tilting, slipping toward the new abyss. "It will fall," Taji yelled, trying to find purchase. "It cannot," Evelyn screamed, her mind racing. "That fissure, it leads to the aquifer. If it detonates down there, it will not just be a blast, it will be poison. It will shatter the water source for everyone." They were no longer trying to drown the bomb. They were trying to stop it from falling into the one place that would mean ultimate destruction. 40 seconds. Nakai threw his body against the crate, his boots sliding in the loose dirt. He was losing. It was too heavy. "Deacon!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice tearing. "Ring the bell! Wake the town!" From the church tower, the great bell rang. Not the fire alarm this time. It was a frantic, desperate, clanging peal. "Help, now!" Lights appeared. The people, woken by the battle, the gunfire, the earthquake, poured from their homes. They saw a nightmare. They saw the Apache warrior, the boy, and the schoolteacher, losing a battle with a heavy crate on the edge of a new, dark canyon. They saw the tied-up, terrified form of Lance Crowder, his eyes fixed on the crate. They understood. Jeb the rancher, the man who had argued for the railroad, was the first. "Do not let it fall," he bellowed. He grabbed the edge of the crate. Then Maria, Thomas's mother. then Mr. Harris, the mercantile owner, then 2, then 10. Dominga, having hidden her wagon, ran from the alley. Deacon, his rifle in one hand, his bad arm useless, slammed his good shoulder against the wood. A human chain, settlers, ranchers, saloon keepers, and Apache. They grabbed hold. "Pull," Deacon roared. With a collective groan, they dragged the crate back from the abyss onto the solid ground of the main street. The clock was still ticking. 10 seconds! Tazi yelled. They all fell back, a wave of terror. It was too late. Evelyn did not run. She leaped onto the crate. She still had the suture needle from her pocket. She did not have time for the lid. She saw the wires, the ones Crowder had so proudly displayed, running from the clock. She jammed the steel needle into the clockwork mechanism, a desperate, hopeless attempt to stop the gears. The needle snapped. 5. Her hands, bloody and raw, tore at the main wire. It was thick, insulated. She could not break it. She saw where it connected to the first brass detonating cap. She did not try to cut it. She grabbed the wire in her teeth and ripped it from the cap with a savage cry. 1. The ticking stopped. A dry metallic click echoed in the sudden, absolute silence. Nothing. The town, the warriors, the settlers, they all stood, frozen, gasping in the dust. It was over. A slow, polite clapping broke the silence. A man stepped out of the shadow of the mercantile. He was not a gunman. He was clean, dressed in a fine black wool suit and a city hat. He looked untouched by the grit, the blood, the fear. It was Baron Caleb Rusk. "What a show," he said, his voice calm, cultured. "Truly, you have cost me a great deal of money, Miss Shaw, and you have ruined a very expensive piece of equipment." Sheriff Malloy was behind him, looking pale and sick. "Baron, the crowd—" "Quiet, Malloy," Rusk said. He held up a piece of paper, a crisp, official-looking document. "My permit, signed this morning by the territorial governor himself. I have full legal rights to this land, this water, and this entire canyon. Your lawyer in Prescott," he smiled at Evelyn, "is, as it happens, on my permanent payroll. He sent me a very helpful telegram." He looked at the crowd. "You are all trespassing. You are all interfering with the lawful progress of the United States." Malloy stepped forward, his badge gleaming. "He is right. This is official. You all have to go home now." "No," Nakai said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the night. He nodded to the trussed-up, gagged form of Lance Crowder. "He is not trespassing. He is a witness." Nakai walked to Crowder and pulled the gag from his mouth. Crowder, seeing his boss had abandoned him, that his trap had failed, that he was surrounded by a town that wanted his blood, broke. "He made me do it," Crowder screamed, his eyes rolling. "Rusk. It was all Rusk. He paid me to stage the ambush. He paid me to burn the totem. He paid me to kill the Apache boy. The first one, Taji's brother, he paid me for it all." The confession, raw and terrified, hung in the air. The town heard Maria, Jeb, Mr. Harris. They looked from the sputtering mercenary to the calm, suited Baron. Baron Rusk's face went blank. The smile was gone. He was no longer a businessman. He was a cornered animal. Silence. He whispered. He pulled a small, silver-plated derringer from his vest pocket. He did not aim at Crowder. He aimed at the crowd. He grabbed the nearest person to him, the one who had cost him everything. He seized Evelyn Shaw, pulling her in front of him, the tiny, deadly barrel of the pistol pressed to her temple. "Get back," Rusk hissed, his voice shaking. "All of you, or I will paint the street with her brains." Nakai moved. He did not lunge. He did not hesitate. He threw himself in front of Evelyn, a human shield. Rusk fired. The sound of the small gun was a sharp crack. Nakai grunted, a short, violent sound, as the bullet burned a hot groove across his shoulder. His good one. He did not fall. He shoved Evelyn behind him, his knife appearing in his hand. Before Rusk could fire his second barrel, another, much larger boom echoed from the church tower. Rusk screamed. The derringer in his hand exploded, shattered by a .50 caliber slug. 2 of his fingers were gone, replaced by a spray of blood. He stumbled back, clutching his ruined hand, howling in agony. Deacon Hale stepped out of the forge, the long barrel of his buffalo rifle smoking. He was one-armed, bleeding, but he was steady. "Drop it," Deacon commanded. The entire town, no longer a mob, but a single, angry body, stepped forward. They formed a tight, silent circle. Jeb the rancher, Maria, the blacksmith, the saloon keeper. They looked at the bleeding baron, at the cowardly sheriff, at the whimpering mercenary. "Arrest him," Jeb said, his voice cold and final. "Arrest them all." Nakai retrieved the ropes he had used on Crowder. He threw them to Taji. Taji, his head held high, tied the screaming Baron Rusk. Nakai, his shoulder bleeding through his shirt, bound the sheriff, who was weeping, his hands shaking. The detonators were safe. The clock was silent. The gap was alive. Dawn broke over a town that felt scoured, hollowed out, and new. The silence was heavier than the dust. In the center of the street, Baron Caleb Rusk, Sheriff Malloy, and the mercenary Lance Crowder were bound tightly to the hitching rail in front of the jailhouse. They were artifacts of a power that had evaporated at sunrise. The Gatling gun, its belt broken, sat useless on the boardwalk, a monument to greed. The first act of the new day was not celebration. It was triage. Evelyn, her legs shaking from adrenaline, her hands raw from the blasting cap wires, became the nurse. The town, emerging from their homes, saw her, saw the blood on her, and saw the living men who needed mending. Her first patient was Nakai. He had sat down, his back against the well, the graze from Rusk's derringer a bright, angry red along his shoulder. "It is a burn," she said, her voice clinical, though her hands trembled. She cleaned it with whiskey from a bottle someone handed her. He did not flinch, but his eyes never left her face. "You are hurt," he said, nodding to her hands. "I am fine," she said, wrapping his shoulder with a clean bandage. Next was Deacon Hale. He was the town's hero. He sat in his forge, pale and sweating, but alive. The bullet was deep. "I cannot take it out," Evelyn said, her voice tight with frustration. "It is too deep. We need a real doctor." "You are what we have, Miss Shaw." Deacon grunted. "And you did the work. Just keep me from fever." Dominga, her face streaked with smoke, brought hot water. Maria, the mother of Thomas, brought clean rags. They worked together, the 3 women, cleaning and binding the wound. The whispers about Evelyn, the smear campaign, had died in the night. The women who had shunned her now served her. Taji was last. The boy's head had a long, nasty gash from the rifle butt, but he was standing, his eyes bright with pride. He winced as Evelyn cleaned the wound, but he did not complain. Deacon Hale, seeing this, reached out with his good hand and clapped the boy on the arm. "You have courage, son," Deacon said, "like your cousin." Taji stood taller. He was a warrior. He was honored. Jeb the rancher, the man who had been Rusk's loudest supporter, walked up to Deacon. He looked at the bound men, at the broken Gatling gun, at the exhausted group. He took off his hat. "Deacon," he said, his voice rough, "you stood up. You took a bullet for that man." He nodded at Nakai. "You saved this town." Dominga, meanwhile, walked across the street to the gilded cage. The heavy padlock Malloy had put on her door was still there. Deacon saw her. He wordlessly picked up his heaviest blacksmithing hammer. He walked to the door and, with one swing of his good arm, shattered the lock. The door swung open. "Your house, ma'am," he said. Dominga nodded to him, walked inside, and began to put the chairs back on their legs. The justice of the town was simple, but it was not enough. Just after noon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It was not a storm. It was riders. The town tensed, but these were not mercenaries. They wore the dark blue of the United States cavalry. They were not alone. They escorted a carriage, which pulled up in the center of town. A man in a black, dusty suit, looking profoundly tired and profoundly annoyed, stepped out. He looked at the bound men, the broken Gatling gun, and the armed, watchful citizens. "I am Circuit Judge Silas Croft," he announced to the street. "I received a frantic and, frankly, unbelievable telegram from a territorial lawyer in Prescott." "Who had received a frantic telegram from you?" He pointed at Evelyn. "It spoke of public murder and a private army. I see you are not exaggerating." The trial was held in the street. The Forge Anvil was the witness stand. The evidence was absolute. First, Lance Crowder, faced with the judge and the cavalry, his bravado gone. He confessed everything: the ambush, the murder of Nakai's brother, Taji, a year prior, the arson of the totem, all on Rusk's orders. Second, the telegraph operator, Peters. He wept as he confessed to being on Rusk's payroll, to intercepting Evelyn's message, and to sending the warning to Rusk that had brought the Gatling gun. Third, Baron Rusk. He tried to bluster. He presented his permit. Judge Croft looked at it for 1 second. "This is a forgery," he said, "and even if it were real, it does not give you the right to murder citizens." Finally, Sheriff Malloy. He simply broke down, admitting he had taken Rusk's money to lose evidence, to intimidate the town, and to look the other way. Judge Croft's verdict was swift. "In the absence of a functioning local court," he declared, "this court finds you guilty, Baron Rusk, Lance Crowder, for conspiracy, attempted murder, and the murder of Taji of the Apache, Sheriff Malloy, for gross dereliction of duty, bribery, and accessory to murder. You will be taken to the territorial prison in Yuma." The cavalry, stern and efficient, loaded the 3 men, now in heavy irons, into a prison wagon. The town watched as the wagon rolled out, taking the long shadow of fear with it. The town was free, but the problem remained. Judge Croft turned to the gathered citizens. "Your town is without law, and your water source," he nodded to the cracked cistern, "is vulnerable." A figure appeared at the edge of the street. It was Nalin, Nakai's grandmother. She did not walk like an old woman. She walked with the authority of the land itself. She stopped in front of the judge. "The water is not vulnerable," she said, her voice clear. "It is protected by us." Deacon Hale, his arm in a sling, stepped forward. "She is right, Your Honor. The water belongs to the Gap." "But we all must drink," Jeb the rancher added, his voice quiet, respectful. The judge looked at the new, strange alliance, the blacksmith, the rancher, the Apache elder. "Then I suggest," the judge said, "you make your own law." They sat at a table outside the gilded cage, Nayland, Deacon Hale, Jeb, and Evelyn, not as a negotiator, but as the town's clerk. They did not use legal paper. They used a page from Dominga's ledger. They called it the Joint Water Treaty of Dust Mercy. The terms were simple. First, Ancestors' Gap, the springs, and the burial grounds were declared sacred and protected. No railroad, no blasting, no desecration. Second, the town well would be maintained, and its access guaranteed for all citizens. Third, the ranchers could water their cattle, but only downstream, from the runoff, ensuring the springs themselves were never fouled. Fourth, the Apache and the town council, represented by Deacon Hale, would jointly patrol the Gap, protecting it from any future threats. They all signed. Nayland made her mark. A firm X, Deacon, Jeb, and Dominga signed their names, and Evelyn signed last, as witness. The land was safe. The work of healing could begin. Evelyn felt the sting of the smear campaign long after Rusk was gone. The leaflets had been torn down, but the memory of the words, loose morals, consorts with savages, still clung to her. She felt the eyes of the townswomen, and she flinched, expecting judgment. She was sweeping the steps of her schoolhouse, which was still scarred by the dust storm. When Maria approached, the mother held her son, Thomas, by the hand. "Teacher," Maria said. She looked uncomfortable, but determined. Evelyn braced herself. "Yes, Maria." "We saw the drawings. We heard the whispers." Maria looked at the ground, then back at Evelyn, her eyes fierce. "We were fools. We were scared. And you were brave." She pushed Thomas forward. "My son breathes because of you. This town lives because of you. Shame is not for you, Miss Shaw. The shame is for us. Forever believing it." She handed Evelyn a fresh-baked loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. Evelyn took it. The shame. The last weapon Rusk had used against her, dissolved and blew away like dust. Miles away, Nakai stood at the spot in the gap where his brother had been shot in the back. He had Crowder's confession. He had seen the man taken away in chains. The thirst for vengeance, the hot anger that had driven him for a year, was gone. He had not taken Crowder's life. He had fought for justice. He had chosen to save the water. He had chosen to save Evelyn. He knelt and placed a small, smooth river stone on the spot. It was not a marker of death. It was a marker of memory. He looked at the pure, running water. Hozo, harmony. He had not balanced a death with a death. He had balanced a death with the preservation of life. He was, at last, at peace. Life in Dust Mercy resumed, but its heartbeat was different. Deacon Hale, with his good arm, and Taji, working beside him, rebuilt the town well. They built a low, strong stone fence around it, protecting it, a shared act of creation. The next Monday, Evelyn rang the school bell. This time, all the children came. Jeb's two sons, Mr. Harris's daughter, Maria's son, Thomas, the Hale girls, and, sitting shyly near the back, 3 Apache children, who had come down from the gap with Tazi. The small schoolhouse was too crowded, so Evelyn moved the benches and the blackboard outside, into the clean air, under the shade of the mercantile's long awning. She wrote on the board, "Water," and beside it, "To." "Today," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We will learn both." That evening, the heat of the long day finally broke. Evelyn sat alone under the great cottonwood tree by the stream, the one place in town that felt truly peaceful. She was watching the water flow, her hands loosely clasped in her lap. She did not startle when Nakai appeared. She had felt his approach, a quiet shift in the air. He sat beside her, not too close, but sharing the shade. They sat in silence for a long time. It was a comfortable silence, earned by fire and fear. "The town is safe," Evelyn said at last. "Yes," he replied. She looked at her hands, still scraped and bruised from the detonator wires. He looked at his, the bandage she had tied still clean. "You will return to the gap," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, and it left a small, hollow ache in her chest. "My path is here," he said, touching the earth. "My people are safe, but the path, it is quiet." He turned to look at her. His eyes were not the hard, guarded eyes of the warrior on the ridge. They were calm, deep, and open. "I do not wish to walk it alone," he said. Evelyn's heart, which had been through so much, seemed to stop and then start again, a new, slow, powerful beat. "I want to walk with you," he said, his voice low, as if mending the last broken piece of her. "Through this season, and all the seasons that follow. The loneliness of Missouri, the terror of the ambush, the humiliation of the smear, it all washed away in the simple, steady warmth of his gaze." "Me too," she whispered. He did not kiss her. The kiss they had shared was for the battle, for the desperation. This was for the peace. He reached out and took her hand. His hand was rough, strong, and calloused. Hers was small and scraped. It was not a passionate grasp. It was solid. It was an anchor. It felt, she thought, like clean, running water. They sat like that, hand in hand, as the sun began to set, painting the cliffs of Ancestors' Gap in shades of rose and gold. They both knew, without saying it, that this was enough for now. The town needed to heal. They needed to heal. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "The rainy season will come soon," he said, looking at the sky. "It is the time of renewal for my people." She looked up at him, understanding. "If this promise," he said, his thumb brushing the back of her hand, "if it still stands firm when the first rains come, we will bind it." It was not a question. It was a vow, an engagement, made not with a ring, but with the land itself. Evelyn smiled, her first true, unguarded smile. "It will stand," she said. The rains came. They did not come as a violent flood, but as a soft, patient, soaking promise. The red earth, cracked and thirsty, drank deeply. The promise made under the cottonwood tree, the one that rested on the coming of the rains, had been kept by the land. 1 year passed, the season turned, and turned again. Ancestors' Gap was transformed. It was no longer a place of red rock and fear. The stream, running clear and full, nourished a ribbon of vibrant green. The cottonwoods were thick, their leaves a bright canopy against the blue sky. The air, once choked with dust and gunpowder, smelled of damp earth and willow. The railroad, it turned out, was a fickle beast. Baron Rusk's empire, built on bribery and forged permits, had collapsed under the weight of his public trial. The testimony of Crowder, the word of Judge Croft, and the angry dispatches from Dust Mercy had made him an object of territorial disgrace. The railroad, when it finally pressed west, was forced by new regulations to reroute 20 miles to the south, following a longer, less efficient, but legally sound path. It bypassed Dust Mercy completely. The town had not died. It had, instead, begun to live. It was not a boom town, slick with railroad money and transient greed. It was a life town. It survived on the ranchers, like Jeb, who now grazed his cattle according to the Joint Water Treaty. His herds healthy, it thrived as a way station, a sustainable stop for travelers who knew it as a place of fair trade and safe water. The sign on the rebuilt mercantile read, "Dust Mercy. All are welcome." They were a family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by fire, and by water. Evelyn Shaw was no longer the new teacher. She was simply Evelyn. Her small clinic, attached to the schoolhouse, was now officially funded by the new town council, chaired by Deacon Hale. She had a steady supply of quinine, of bandages, of laudanum. Her schoolhouse was full. The blackboard remained outside, under the long awning, and the lessons were always bilingual. The children, Apache and Anglo, learned that two and water were the same word, just wearing different clothes. Nakai was no longer a shadow on the ridge. He was the leader of the Ridge Watch. It was his creation, a joint patrol of young Apache scouts, including Tazi, and the sons of the local ranchers. They did not just guard the sacred springs from outsiders. They managed the cattle routes, ensuring the herds did not overgraze. They watched the dry canyons for the first sign of fire. They were the eyes of the new, shared land. Dominga was the heart, the gilded cage. Its lock shattered and its doors wide open, was the town hall. It was where the council met, where ranchers and Apache shared coffee, where strategy was formed. Dominga was the treasurer, the confidant, the unofficial aunt to every child in town. She was, as she often said, cousin to everyone. The anniversary of the treaty arrived. The first new rains of the second season had come, soft and promising, just as they had the year before. The promise was due. It was not a wedding, not in the way Evelyn had known in Missouri. It was a binding. It took place where they had first spoken of it, under the great cottonwood tree by the stream. There was no preacher, there was no judge, just their family. Deacon Hale, his polished star on his chest, stood as the town's witness. Dominga stood beside him, her arms crossed, a rare, soft smile on her face. Taji, now a tall young man, stood for Nakai's people, and Nalin, Nakai's grandmother, officiated. She did not read from a book. She held a small, unadorned clay bowl. She knelt, filling it with water from the sacred spring. She held it up. "The water," she said, her voice clear, "is the blood of the earth. It is life. It remembers all." She dropped a single, perfect kernel of yellow corn into the bowl. "The earth," she said, "it is the body. It gives sustenance." She took a single strand of red thread, the color of the canyon earth and the human heart. She took Evelyn's wrist. She took Nakai's. She wrapped the thread around them both, binding them together. "You are of two worlds," Nalin said, her sharp, clear eyes looking at them both. "Do not seek to make one world. That is the way of the conqueror. Seek, instead, to honor both. Let his path be sacred to you." She looked at Evelyn. "Let her words be sacred to you." She looked at Nakai. "The water joins you, the earth feeds you, the thread binds you." Nakai turned to Evelyn. His eyes were steady. He spoke in his own language, a low, solemn vow that the wind carried into the leaves of the cottonwood. Evelyn turned to Nakai. She did not know his words, but she knew his heart. "What is yours, I will protect," she said, her voice clear. "Where you walk, I will walk. My heart is your home." He slid a simple, thin silver ring onto her finger. It was unadorned, warm from his hand. He had hammered it himself. She did not give him a ring. She handed him a new, leather-bound book, its pages clean and empty. "For our new story," she whispered. Nalin held the bowl out to them. Nakai took it and drank. He passed it to Evelyn. She drank. It was done. That night, they were not in her small room behind the school, nor in his camp in the Gap. They were in the small, sturdy adobe house that Deacon Jeb and Taji had spent the last 2 months building, a house that sat on the rise of land halfway between the town and the canyon, a house of both worlds. A fire burned in the hearth, its light soft and warm. The air smelled of clean adobe, of juniper smoke, and of the first rain on the dry earth. He sat before her and gently unwound the red thread from their wrists. He coiled it carefully and placed it on the mantel, beside the blank book. Evelyn's heart was beating, a fast, steady drum. She had faced gunfire and dust storms and angry mobs. This was a different kind of bravery. He saw it in her eyes. He did not rush. He did not command. He sat on the warm furs before the fire, his gaze steady, and simply held out his hand, the one she had bandaged. It was healed now, scarred but strong. She placed her hand in his. He knelt before her. He did not reach for her dress. He gently took her foot and, with slow, careful hands, he unlaced her heavy, dusty boot. He set it aside. He did the same with the other. It was a simple, profound act of service. She, in turn, reached up. She unfastened the leather thong around her neck, the one that held the eagle-carved amulet he had given her. She set it carefully on the mantel, beside the coiled thread. There was no shame, There was no memory of the hurried, terrified moment at the hot spring. This was slow. This was chosen. This was Hosho. He touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her jaw. She was not afraid. She was home. The scene faded. There was only the sound of their breathing. Mingling with the soft crackle of the fire, there was the steady, reassuring beat of his heart, which she felt as she rested her hand on his chest. It was a promise of safety. It was the absolute, unspoken certainty of consent. It was the quiet, true beginning of their shared life. Evelyn woke first, in the cool gray light just before dawn. The fire was a bed of glowing embers. Nakai was asleep beside her, his face so often a mask of wariness and duty, peaceful in the soft light. She felt a profound, unshakable sense of place. She slipped on one of his soft cloth shirts, which fell to her knees, and stepped outside. The desert was breathing. She looked out over the land, toward the sleeping town. She thought of her old life, her suffocating loneliness in Missouri. She had once thought freedom meant being alone, unburdened by anyone. She had been so wrong. True freedom, she realized, was not the absence of bonds. It was the choice of bonds. It was not walking alone. It was choosing, without fear, the person you wanted to walk with. She looked toward the gap, where the protected springs lay. Justice, she now knew, was not a loud, sudden victory. It was not the crack of a judge's gavel. It was the quiet, daily, shared work of protecting the source. It was steady. It was persistent. It was like the water itself. As the sun's first ray touched the high red cliffs, she saw it. A great eagle, its wings spread wide, catching the morning light. It soared high above Ancestors' Gap. It circled over the springs, over the sacred, untouched burial grounds. It swooped low, for one perfect, suspended moment. Its shadow, dark and clear, passed over the surface of the stream, a shadow on the unbroken water. It was the land, whole and blessed. Nakai came out, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. He stood beside her, his arm settling around her. They watched the eagle disappear into the sun. Later that day, the new council met in the gilded cage. Dominga, Deacon, Jeb, and now Nalin and Nakai. They were not planning for a crisis. They were planning for a future. They established the first joint fire watch, a lesson learned from the dry season. Apache scouts and ranchers' sons would clear brush together. They established the Water Council, a permanent body to manage the shared resource, ensuring the treaty held, even in the driest years. Evelyn, sitting at the table, took the minutes. She opened the new leather book, dipped her pen, and wrote the first words of their new story. The work was not over. It would never be over. But it was shared. She looked at the faces at the table. Apache, Anglo, Mexican, Black. They were all different, all scarred, all stubborn, and they were all here. She looked at Nakai. He met her gaze, a small, quiet smile that was only for her. The Wild West was not tamed, but people could choose to be gentle with it and with each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts on Nakai and Evelyn's journey. Please remember to subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and hit that hype button to help share this story with even more listeners.